I thought taking the job would be a fresh start. The ad seemed straightforward, a live-in caregiving position for an elderly man in need of assistance with daily tasks. The pay was good, the hours flexible, and the mansion, though old and clearly in need of repairs, had a charm that drew me in. It felt like a no-brainer. I packed my things and moved in the same week, eager to start this new chapter. Mr. Grayson, the man I was hired to care for, was frail and quiet when I first met him. He rarely left his chair by the grand window in the parlor, where he would spend hours gazing out at the overgrown garden. His voice was soft, and his movements slow, which made me feel like I'd have no trouble managing his care. At first, everything seemed fine. I helped him with meals, medications, and some light cleaning around the house. But it wasn't long before things started to feel off. The first thing that unsettled me was how Mr. Grayson always seemed to know exactly where I was in the house. It didn't matter if I was in the kitchen, the attic, or one of the many unused bedrooms, he'd call out in that soft, rasping voice, "Miss Clara, could you come here for a moment?" At first, I thought it was coincidence. Maybe he heard me moving around, or maybe it was just a lucky guess. But the way he timed it, always catching me in the middle of something, started to feel deliberate. Then there were the doors. Some of them were locked when I arrived, which wasn't surprising given the mansion's size. But more doors seemed to lock themselves over time. The pantry, the library, the front door, one by one, they became inaccessible. When I asked Mr. Grayson about it, he gave a vague answer, something about the house being old and the locks sticking. But his tone was casual, almost dismissive, like he didn't think it was worth worrying about. I didn't press him, but I started carrying my phone everywhere, just in case I needed to call someone. Things got stranger as the days went on. At night, I'd hear faint sounds, footsteps in the hall, doors creaking open and shut, but when I'd check, no one was there. I told myself it was just the house settling, but it didn't explain why certain objects kept moving. A book I'd left on the nightstand would end up on the desk. My keys, always in my bag, were suddenly sitting on the kitchen counter. When I mentioned it to Mr. Grayson, he'd smile faintly and say, "The house has a way of keeping things interesting." One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, I noticed him watching me intently. His gaze wasn't the kind you'd expect from an elderly man relying on a caregiver. It was sharp, calculating, almost predatory. "You're adjusting well," he said, his tone carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. I forced a smile and nodded, but his words stuck with me. Adjusting to what, exactly? The longer I stayed, the more it felt like the house wasn't just a workplace, it was a trap. The turning point came a week later. I woke up in the middle of the night to a loud bang that echoed through the house. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and crept down the dark hallway, the faint glow of the moon casting eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. The sound had come from the kitchen, but when I got there, everything was eerily quiet. A chair was tipped over, and one of the cabinets was wide open, its contents scattered on the floor. As I crouched down to pick up the mess, I heard the unmistakable creak of the floorboards behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Mr. Grayson stood in the doorway, his pale face partially obscured by the shadows. He wasn't hunched or frail like usual. He stood straight, his posture imposing, his eyes cold and piercing. "What are you doing down here?" he asked, his voice sharp, the frailty gone. I stammered something about the noise, but he didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow step toward me. "Some things in this house are better left alone," he said. "I suggest you remember that." Then he turned and walked back into the darkness, leaving me frozen, clutching the edge of the counter. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Grayson was watching me, even when he wasn't in the room. His frailty now seemed like an act, a mask he wore to keep me off guard. I decided I needed to leave, but every time I tried to make a plan, something stopped me. My phone charger disappeared, my car keys were nowhere to be found, and the front door lock wouldn't budge, even with the key. I started to wonder if I was being paranoid or if the house itself was conspiring against me. One night, I went to his room to deliver his medication and found the bed empty. The sheets were perfectly made, as if no one had been there at all. Panic set in as I searched the house, calling his name, but he didn't answer. When I reached the basement door, a door I'd never been able to open before, I saw it was slightly ajar. A faint light spilled out into the hallway. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I pushed the door open and descended the creaking stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and the sound of faint, muffled whispers sent chills down my spine. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a dimly lit room filled with things that didn't belong in any normal basement, strange symbols painted on the walls, shelves lined with old, dusty books, and a table covered in papers and small, unidentifiable objects. But what made my blood run cold was what stood in the center of the room, an old chair surrounded by chains bolted to the floor. Before I could take another step, I heard the door at the top of the stairs creak shut. I spun around, but it was too late. Mr. Grayson was standing there, a smirk on his face, no longer the frail man I thought I knew. "Curiosity," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "always gets the better of people like you." He started descending the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, his shadow stretching across the room. "You were supposed to follow the rules. Stay where I put you, do what you're told. But no, you had to dig." I backed away, my hands searching for something, anything, to defend myself with. My fingers brushed against a heavy book on the table, and I gripped it tightly. "Let me go," I demanded, though my voice betrayed my fear. He chuckled, low and guttural. "Let you go?" He gestured to the chains in the middle of the room. "You're exactly where you belong." As Mr. Grayson stepped closer, I felt a surge of adrenaline drown out my fear. Clutching the heavy book, I waited until he was within reach. Then, with all the strength I could muster, I swung it at his face. The corner of the book caught him across the temple, and he stumbled back with a grunt, losing his footing on the uneven floor. Without thinking, I darted past him and up the stairs, my heart pounding like a drum. The door at the top was locked, but I threw myself against it, ignoring the pain in my shoulder. Behind me, I could hear him recovering, his footsteps pounding up the stairs. "You won't make it out," he bellowed, his voice booming. With one final, desperate shove, the door burst open, and I ran into the hallway. I didn't stop to think, I just kept running, my bare feet pounding against the wooden floors. When I reached the front door, I expected it to be locked like before, but to my shock, it swung open easily. The cold night air hit me like a wave, and I didn't look back as I sprinted down the overgrown driveway and into the darkness of the road. Behind me, the mansion loomed, its broken windows glowing faintly from the lights inside. I thought I saw a shadow in one of the upper windows, watching as I disappeared into the night. I didn't stop running until I found a gas station a mile down the road. The attendant called the police, but when they arrived and searched the mansion, they found it empty. The basement? Completely bare, no chains, no symbols, no signs anyone had been there. They told me Mr. Grayson had vanished, and the ownership records for the house were decades out of date. I've moved far away since then, but I still can't sleep some nights. I'll hear a creak in the floorboards or see a shadow out of the corner of my eye, and I'm reminded of his chilling words, "You're exactly where you belong." I escaped that house, but part of me wonders if Mr. Grayson is still out there, waiting for his next visitor. I don't know where to start. Maybe I'm writing this because I need to vent, or maybe because I want someone to know the truth in case I don't make it. My name doesn't matter, and honestly, neither does where I live. All you need to know is that I've been under the thumb of my guardian, let's call her Ruth, for as long as I can remember. On the surface, she's just a strict, overbearing adult trying to keep a teenager in line. But if you look closer, you'll see the cracks, the lies, the manipulation, the way she's slowly chipped away at my confidence and independence. For years, she's controlled everything, my finances, my friends, even my ability to leave the house. Every paycheck I earn at my part-time job goes straight into her account for safekeeping. Every decision I make has to go through her. At first, I didn't question it, she's the adult, right? But as I got older, I started to see the pattern. She wasn't protecting me, she was trapping me. And now, I've had enough. I've been planning my escape for months, carefully saving every dollar I can without her noticing. Tonight is the night. But as I sit here packing my bag, I can't shake the feeling that something is going to go wrong. I packed as quietly as I could, shoving clothes, a toothbrush, and a little bit of cash I'd managed to hide into a small backpack. Every creak of the floorboard sounded deafening in the silence of the house. Ruth's room was down the hall, and I could hear the faint sound of her TV, her nightly routine. I'd timed this perfectly. She'd fall asleep watching one of her shows, just like always, and I'd slip out unnoticed. I'd even left my phone on the kitchen counter, knowing she'd check it and think I hadn't gone far. But as I zipped up the bag, doubts crept in. What if she woke up and caught me? What if I couldn't make it to the bus station in time? What if this plan, years in the making, crumbled because of one tiny mistake? I shook the thoughts away. I couldn't let fear stop me. I'd endured too much to back out now. I slung the bag over my shoulder and opened my bedroom window. The cool night air hit me, and for the first time in years, I felt a hint of freedom. Carefully, I climbed out, landing softly on the grass below. The bus station was about a mile away, and with any luck, I'd be on a bus and out of town before Ruth even noticed I was gone. The walk to the bus station felt like the longest mile of my life. Every shadow, every passing car made my heart race. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see Ruth's car barreling down the street, her silhouette lit by the dashboard glow. But the street stayed quiet, the kind of eerie calm that makes you question if you're really alone. I clutched my bag tightly, trying to focus on the sound of my footsteps to drown out my spiraling thoughts. When I finally reached the bus station, it was almost empty, just a bored-looking attendant behind the counter and a man asleep on one of the benches. I bought my ticket with shaking hands, feeling like the cashier could see right through me. One-way ticket to anywhere, I thought. But I wasn't just going anywhere, I was heading to a friend's place in the next town over. They didn't know everything about my situation, just enough to offer me a couch to crash on for a few nights. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I checked the schedule and saw that my bus wouldn't arrive for another 15 minutes. Sitting down on the farthest bench, I tucked my bag under my feet and kept my head low. But as the minutes ticked by, a gnawing feeling crept in. I felt like I was being watched. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but when I glanced toward the entrance, my heart stopped. Ruth was standing in the doorway. My stomach dropped, and my hands instinctively tightened around my bag. Ruth stood there, scanning the station with a look that froze me in place. She hadn't seen me yet, but it was only a matter of time. I slid lower on the bench, trying to shield myself behind the sleeping man a few seats away. My mind raced. How did she find me? Did she follow me? Did someone tell her I was leaving? She started walking, her heels clicking against the tile floor, the sound echoing in the empty station. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She was getting closer, her eyes sweeping over every corner. Then, just as she turned toward my bench, the bus pulled in outside with a loud hiss of brakes. It was my chance. I grabbed my bag and bolted toward the exit, keeping my head down and weaving between the seats. "Hey!" Ruth's voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. I didn't look back. I pushed through the doors, shoving my ticket into the driver's hand and scrambling onto the bus. As soon as I found a seat near the back, I slumped down, trying to disappear. Ruth appeared outside the bus, her face a mask of fury, but the driver didn't wait. The doors hissed shut, and we pulled away, leaving her standing on the curb. As the bus rolled out of the station, I stayed crouched in my seat, watching Ruth shrink into the distance through the smudged window. My chest felt tight, and I wasn't sure if it was from the sprint or the adrenaline still coursing through me. I'd done it. I'd actually escaped. But the relief didn't come right away. Instead, there was this strange emptiness, like a weight I'd carried for years had finally lifted, leaving me unsure of how to feel without it. The ride to the next town was quiet, the hum of the bus engine lulling most of the passengers to sleep. I sat there, clutching my bag, replaying everything that had led to this moment. Ruth had always made me feel small, like I owed her everything, like I'd never make it on my own. But tonight, I proved her wrong. I wasn't just running away, I was reclaiming my life. When the bus finally pulled into the station, my friend was waiting for me, leaning against their car with a concerned look. As soon as I stepped off, they pulled me into a hug, and for the first time in years, I felt safe. I knew there'd be challenges ahead, Ruth wouldn't let go that easily, and building a new life wouldn't be simple. But for the first time, I had hope. Hope that I could figure it out, piece by piece, on my own terms. And that was worth everything. I've been a delivery driver for about a year now, and most nights are pretty uneventful. You drop off the food, say thanks, and move on to the next order. But last night was different. I can't stop thinking about it, and honestly, I'm not sure if I'll ever take another late-night delivery again. It started like any other shift. I got an order for a small meal, nothing unusual, to a newly developed housing area on the edge of town. I'd seen the place before while driving, a bunch of half-built houses and empty lots surrounded by construction equipment. The GPS directed me to one of the houses near the back of the site, and when I pulled up, the place looked completely deserted. No lights, no cars, nothing. I double-checked the app to make sure I had the right address. It was definitely the place. I parked the car and grabbed the bag of food, my eyes scanning the area. The house looked unfinished, with tarps flapping in the wind and piles of lumber stacked nearby. It didn't feel right, but I figured maybe the customer was one of the contractors or someone checking on the site. As I approached the door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. I knocked, hesitating for a moment. "Hello. Delivery." I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. A man's voice answered from inside. "Come in. I'm in the back, just need you to sign for it." His tone was friendly enough, but something about it felt off. Still, I stepped inside, telling myself it was just a quick drop-off. The interior was barely finished, exposed wooden beams, drywall half-hung, and wires dangling from the ceiling. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and paint. "Where are you?" I called, my grip tightening on the bag. "Back here," the voice responded, deeper into the house. Against my better judgment, I followed. The further I walked into the house, the darker and colder it seemed to get. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the bare walls. The voice had come from a room at the end of a narrow hallway, the only part of the house that seemed somewhat finished. As I approached, I noticed the door was slightly ajar, and a faint light spilled out into the hallway. My instincts were screaming at me to turn around, but I'd already come this far. I pushed the door open cautiously. The room was empty, except for a single chair in the center and a small table with a clipboard and pen. The light came from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, flickering faintly. On the table was a note written in shaky, almost childlike handwriting, "Sign here." My stomach dropped. There was no one here, no one waiting for their delivery. Something wasn't right. As I backed away, I heard the faint sound of the front door closing, followed by the unmistakable click of a lock. My chest tightened as the sound of the lock echoed through the empty house. I froze for a moment, my mind racing. Who locked the door? I set the food bag down on the table, my eyes darting around the room for another way out. The windows were covered with plastic sheeting, the kind that contractors use, and I could see they were nailed shut. My pulse quickened as I realized just how isolated I was. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming from the hallway behind me. Slow, deliberate, heavy steps. They weren't trying to hide, whoever it was wanted me to know they were there. I grabbed the clipboard from the table, clutching it like a weapon, and called out, "Hey! Whoever's out there, this isn't funny." My voice shook, and the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, and then, just as I took a step toward the door, the light bulb above me flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room, and my breath came in shallow gasps. I fumbled for my phone, desperate for some light, but as I unlocked the screen, the footsteps started again, louder and closer this time. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. "I'm calling the police," I yelled, though I wasn't sure if it would scare them off or make things worse. My trembling fingers dialed 911, but just as the call connected, a loud bang reverberated through the house. It wasn't the front door or a window, it was closer, maybe just down the hall. I knew I couldn't stay in that room. Gripping the clipboard tightly, I stepped into the hallway, my phone flashlight barely illuminating the unfinished walls. The silence was suffocating, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was just out of sight, watching. As I edged toward the front of the house, I noticed something new. The food bag I'd left on the table was now in the middle of the hallway, the contents spilled across the floor. My stomach twisted. Whoever was in here wasn't just messing with me. They were in control. I stepped around the spilled food, every nerve in my body on edge. The hallway seemed longer now, stretching into a void that felt impossible to escape. My flashlight beam shook as I scanned the walls, searching for anything, anyone, but the space remained empty. I just needed to reach the front door. That was it. Get out and call the police. But as I moved closer, I saw something that stopped me cold, a shadow, tall and motionless, standing in the doorway. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. I couldn't see their face, but the sheer presence was enough to root me in place. My fight-or-flight instinct kicked in, and I turned, bolting back toward the rear of the house. I knew there had to be another exit, a back door, a window, anything. My flashlight caught a door at the end of the hallway. It looked heavy, unfinished, but it was my only option. I slammed into it, throwing my weight against the wood. It creaked open just enough for me to squeeze through, and I stumbled into a cold, dark basement. The air in the basement was damp and heavy, and the faint smell of mold filled my nose. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, revealing only the outlines of stacked boxes and exposed pipes. I knew I couldn't stay there, but going back up wasn't an option. My hands trembled as I searched the walls for another way out. Then, I spotted it, a small window near the ceiling, partially covered by dirt and debris. It wasn't big, but it looked just large enough for me to squeeze through. As I climbed onto an old crate to reach the window, I heard footsteps again, this time coming from the stairs. Slow, deliberate, and descending. My heart raced as I fumbled to unlock the latch, my fingers slipping from the cold metal. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just at the edge of the basement. I didn't dare look back. I pushed the window open, shards of glass scraping against my hands, and crawled through. Just as I slid out onto the wet ground outside, I felt something graze my ankle. I hit the ground hard, scrambling to my feet and sprinting toward my car without looking back. My keys were still in my pocket, and I dove into the driver's seat, locking the doors as quickly as I could. My hands shook so violently that it took 3 tries to start the engine. When I finally pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house loomed in the darkness, and for a brief second, I thought I saw the figure standing at the basement window, watching me leave. I reported everything to the police the next morning, but when they searched the house, they didn't find anything. No signs of anyone living there, no evidence of what happened. They dismissed it as a prank or a misunderstanding, but I know what I saw. I still deliver food, but I don't take late-night orders anymore. And every time I pass an unfinished house, I feel a shiver run down my spine, wondering if someone else will walk into that same trap, or worse, never walk out.